Let's bring him on. Kris Kringle himself, ladies and gentlemen. Lee Camp.
Hey,
how you doing, buddy?
Kris Kringle himself. Happy Festivus, man.
So what sort of like druid ceremony or whatever did you guys celebrate? Did you guys just have like sticks and make them into humans and pray to them or whatever?
Yeah, those little stick dolls where you murder someone and you hang them around in the trees. Yeah, we just did that.
So you guys made it into some creepy cult murder, outdoor pagan murder festival or whatever?
I mean, I always feel super awkward on the like, do you tip your mailman? Do you not? Is it like if I give him $10 in the mailbox, is that offensive? Is that so low? Should I make it, does it have to be like 50 or 100? So we just murdered him. It's less awkward.
It makes sense. I mean, why hem and haw over $5 or $10 when you could just end a life and then make a stick figure out of it, you know?
Well, I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was honored to be a part of our ceremony. I mean, we didn't take out the ball gag to listen to whether he was, but I'm just assuming he was honored. Yeah. How about you? Did you murder anyone?
No, as much as I tried, Lee, I couldn't. I ended up going hiking Christmas Day. Nice. And then I jumped in the ocean.
Cool. So you like saw the natural world.
Traditional Christmas, just like this, like went on a jungle hike.
Graham, all the rest of us chopped down the trees and put them in our living room. You like went to see them in their homes.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, I don't think I didn't have any. The building I'm living in has decorations in the lobby, but I didn't have any in my house. None at all.
That's okay. That's all right. I mean, it makes you a bad capitalist to not buy a bunch of decorations that you only use once a year. But let's be honest, most people probably use them 1 year. So,
well, to be fair, I bought a bunch of stuff and then just threw it away just to celebrate that aspect of
to show I'm part of things. You know, to feel like you want to feel like part of a larger whole and part of a community.
Yeah.
And then I bought you get to see your neighbors while you're throwing them out. You're like, hey, I'm throwing shit out too.
And I bought gift wrap and then just crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I mean, it was really that was the high. I think that was really what brought me back to like my childhood. That was like, this was fun.
Well, and what you're really doing is making sure the algorithm doesn't know that you've gone rogue in the capitalist system. So the credit algorithm system by Chase Bank thinks that you bought the appropriate amount of wrapping paper and disposed of the appropriate amount of plastic lights and things. So
I just love the algorithm. Like there's just these like Matrix guard dudes with the glasses on, just watching ones and zeros. And then a 2 comes up. Oh, Elwood didn't buy gifts this year.
Yep. Like, and then there's a little red light that goes off, and then you're black bagged pretty soon after.
I'm amazed I've been black bagged sooner. I guess I'm just not important enough. That's the problem. I guess I'm just not. If I had a bigger platform, I'd get black bagged. But
yeah, they shut down people's YouTube, and then they wait to see whether they're able to become important without YouTube algorithm help.
So they're like, well, I mean, I've been demonetized for 11 months now. January will be my 12th month of demonetization. And it's like, I'm still able to survive, but I think they're like, well, he's just barely getting by. So
I've actually been demonized for the past 2 years. So it's pretty similar, pretty close.
What does that entail? The demonization of the Lee Camp. How does that shake out?
The YouTube algorithm actually furthers videos that say that I'm the Dark Lord. So,
there's just a Dark Lord scroll on one of your YouTube.
You get a little warning from YouTube. Not that I've been. So first you're demonetized, and then they're like, "We've taken the next step to demonizing you."
Well. They've got I mean, you got long hair and a beard. You wear black clothes, Lee. You seem very Dark Lordy to me. Like,
it's true. So there's a bit of Lucifer in there.
It's a little loose. Well, let's get into Government Secrets, episode 67, last one of 2021.
And just quick teaser, we will, after we do this week in Government Secrets, we will be doing part 2 of the assassination of Mary Meyer. So for those of you who missed part 1, definitely go listen to that.
Yes, I call her Mary Martin. Sorry, Mary Meyer.
That's all right. That's that's half of a woman who was assassinated by the CIA and half of Coldplay was Mary Martin.
I used to rule the world. Boom, boom, boom. CIA. You know how much time it takes me to just get the episode number right? I can't be bothered with like the names of who the CIA killed. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. I mean, honestly, it's a long list. It's a lot to remember.
It is such a lot. It is a long list. But since we're doing the special 3-part Mary Martin series, that's what we're going to focus on. So what I'm going to do is just this week in Government Secrets, and this one, I got to tell you, pretty horrifying. I didn't know this one. So this is part of the Dakota War of 1862, also known as the Sioux Uprising or the Dakota Uprising or the Sioux Outbreak of 1862.
Outbreak, like they're a disease.
Yes, yes. People wanting to defend their own land, indigenous people, is an outbreak. So
we've got an infestation of people who actually it's their land.
Like, how dare these people? And that colonial attitude, you know, it's funny. I was watching last night, just streaming, like, and saw just the early part of, I don't know, of a Full Metal Jacket. And there's that scene right where they come out of Paris Island, where they're now in Vietnam. And there's Matthew Modine's like, you know, Buddy is like, I don't understand these people. Why they're so mad. They don't want our help. You know, it's just like, it's just that. White colonialist. Yeah, they don't want you here. This is their country. We would be furious if like Americans have no concept of what an army from another country on our soil, how it would make us feel. Like if we saw tanks with different flags on them, how would we react to that? We would go bananas.
It was like my favorite one was when Iran shot down one of our drones that was over their airspace.
Yes.
And we flipped out. Like, how dare Iran shoot down our drone? Could you imagine if we were surrounded by military bases of whatever, some enemy like China, like someone we consider an enemy like China, Iran or something, and surrounded by their bases, and they were flying drones over our heads, and then we shot them down, and they're like, what?
I mean, the United States threatened World War III just for the Soviets putting missiles in Cuba. Just the potential of that happening. JFK was like, I will nuke the planet. Like we were going to like wipe it all off. Yep. Just for the idea of some missiles being in Cuba.
Meanwhile, we had our nuclear missiles on the border of Russia. So we had the equivalent.
We had the exact equivalent, and we still do. We have what we have had since post-World War II, and really since the 60s, since the arms race, really, we have had the equivalent of imagine Russian and Chinese bases in Cuba, in all of Mexico. Just imagine just Chinese bases all along the Mexican border. Canada all has Russian bases. I mean, just imagine if we had that, we would go bananas.
Yeah.
We would go bananas. And yet, anyway, so
just one more quick number. The U.S. has roughly 900 military bases outside of the U.S. China has, drum roll, please, 1.
What?
1 outside of China.
Wow. How dare they? I mean, really, that's the thing.
And when they built it, I think it's in Djibouti or something. When they built it, we lost our goddamn minds. We were like, China's taking over the globe.
Right. We lost our goddamn minds. And so this is a little bit of a history, this war that began in August 18th, 1862. At the Lower Sioux Agency along the Minnesota River in southwest Minnesota. The Eastern Dakota, under duress due to the expansion of white European settlers, ceded large tracts of land to the United States in a series of treaties signed in 1837, 1851, and 1858. All 4 bands of Eastern Dakota, particularly the Mdewakanton, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, were displaced and reluctantly moved to a reservation that was 20 miles wide, 10 on both sides of the Minnesota River. They were encouraged by the U.S. Indian agents to become farmers rather than continue their hunting traditions.
Quit your lifestyle and stay in one place, please.
Well, and that's also like, well, hunting, you need weapons. So let's get those out of your hands and just, give you a plow horse.
Could you stop roving around with weapons and just stay in this spot with this lovely rake that we're going to give you?
And grow corn that we're going to buy from you for under market value, probably. So, a crop failure in 1861, followed by a harsh winter, along with poor hunting due to depletion of the wild game, led to starvation and severe hardship for many of the Eastern Dakota. In the summer of 1862, tensions between the Eastern Dakota and the traders and Indian agents reached a breaking point due to the Indian agents being late with the U.S. government annual payments.
Payments to the U.S. government. Is that
what I mean? No. These were payments that the Indian agents were from the U.S. government to the Eastern Dakota.
Okay.
So there's bad crops. The game had been over hunted.
Yeah.
Mainly by the white people. And so then the Indian agents were supposed to give them money. So they didn't even get the money. So the federal government, typical, we'll take care of you. We'll give you federal money. God, I feel like that just happened during a once in 100-year pandemic. I feel like we just, so they were late with the payments, that were owed to the Eastern Dakota. The traders refused to extend credit to the tribesmen for food, in part because the traders, to suspended the payment might not arrive at all due to the American Civil War. On August 17th, 1862, 4 young Native men killed 5 white settlers in Acton, Minnesota. That night, a faction of Little Crow's people decided to attack the Lower Sioux Agency the next morning in an effort to drive all settlers out of the Minnesota River Valley. In the weeks that followed, Dakota warriors attacked and killed hundreds of settlers, causing thousands to flee the area. The Dakota were led by Chief Little Crow, who took hundreds of mixed blood and white hostages, almost all women and children. The demand of the Civil War.
And they were, it wasn't like they were pushed to do this after the fucking 100 years of just devastation.
I know. And it's typical, like, well, the natives went nuts. Why? Because of these treaties that we squelched on in 1837, 1851, and 1858. We just kept taking and taking and taking their land. And finally they went, I'm done with this.
Yeah. Weird. Like, what was it? 2/3 of them had already died from the diseases we brought. And
right. And the constant lies, the breaking of the treaties and stuff that the American government is still breaking to this day, land rights issues. I mean, it just goes on. And wow, they got pissed off and said, we've had enough. I mean,
what are the odds?
On September 26th, let's see. So by the end of the war, 358 settlers have been killed, in addition to 77 soldiers and 29 volunteers. The total number of Dakota casualties is unknown. On September 26th, 269 mixed blood and white hostages were released in Sibley's troops to camp. Approximately 2,000 Dakotas surrendered or were taken into custody, including at least 1,658 non-combatants, as well as those who had opposed the war and helped free the hostages. So, oh God. A group of 100, let's see, where is it? Meanwhile, Little Crow and a group of 150 to 200 followers fled to the northern plains of Dakota Territory and Canada. In less than 6 weeks, a military commission composed of officers from the Minnesota Volunteer Infantry sentenced 303 Dakota men to death. President Abraham Lincoln reviewed the convictions and approved death sentences for 39 out of the 303. On December 26, 1862, 38 were hanged in Mankato, Minnesota, with one getting a reprieve. That was the largest one-day mass execution in American history. The American state.
38. Yeah. Just in case people glazed over that number, 38 natives hanged at once by President Lincoln.
President Lincoln. After 2,000 of them surrendered. Like they surrendered. And another 1,600 non-combatants. So almost 4,000 people said, we're out, we're done. And then 38 people were hung by Lincoln on December 26th.
And this might be, you know, we just kind of added it in there, but this might be some of Wikipedia being the liberal version of events, is that they listed all of the, you know, the number of people killed by the Dakota rising up. But I don't know. I didn't hear them list the number of like Dakota that had been massacred by the U.S. government leading up to that.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, of course. They're just like and even in Wikipedia, again, this is Wikipedia, but Wikipedia was like the total number of Dakota deaths is unknown. Oh, okay. But how many, like you say, so how many died in this conflict?
Can you give us an estimate, maybe?
Yeah, something. You can't even get a round number. Then let's add up all the Dakota that were slaughtered. How many acres of land were taken from them? I mean, that's now we're in this Wikipedia thing. So it's again just like typical America. I mean, it's like we've this story, this specific story. No, we haven't covered, but this type of thing we've covered. I mean, this is when we bombed the. You know, those in Philadelphia, like everyone's had enough. Everyone's had enough, and when they finally push back, it's like, oh, they're terrorists, or this is like unbelievable. Yeah. And Abraham Lincoln did this. I didn't know Lincoln did this, so it's like, he freed the slaves, but
and this is the thing is people are really desperate for an example of an American president who was just like the be all and end all, the purest, the best, and slowly, all of our presidents, if you actually study them, you realize kind of like the horrors that were involved. I mean, you know, most of them up to a certain year owned slaves and things like that. And so then everybody seems to have settled on like, well, JFK was good and for most of it, and Lincoln was just the best. And like Republicans and Democrats alike go, oh, well, Lincoln. And it's like, well, Lincoln had a lot of problematic stuff, such as the largest mass hanging of people, but also of Native Americans in history. And also, he did not run on freeing the slaves. It wasn't a moral issue for him to free the slaves. He ultimately was pushed into freeing the slaves because he realized it could help him win the Civil War. And that was really where that came from, not him just loving equality. So it's like, no, if you are an American president, then you have some problematic shit. Like,
well, there's no way you became president,
right, without
whatever, man. Like whatever, however you did to get there and what you did while you were in office. I mean, even JFK, that we hold him up even pretty highly on this show, but the Pentagon Papers are the Pentagon Papers, and
the thing with JFK is that a lot of problematic shit, but he had a change, a significant change, some of which we're going to mention again in today's story, a significant change, and he was assassinated by the CIA for it. So you see what the limits of where a U.S. president can go.
Yeah, JFK is a cause. It's that old Bill Hicks joke of, he's like, anytime somebody gets elected, they bring him in there, they show him the actual Zapruder film, the real one, and then they're like, any questions? It's like, I'm good, I'm all good. And you're right, like JFK was power hungry and did certain things, and then had a change of heart, and then they killed him for it. And then they killed his brother just for thinking about becoming president.
Yeah.
So that's This Week in Government Secrets. Take down your Abraham Lincoln photo. And now our primary segment, Mary, Martin, or Meyer, whichever name you choose.
Part 2 of the killing of Mary Meyer. So I'll give like a 3-sentence summary for those who didn't listen to part 1, but I hope you go back and listen to part 1 because obviously tons of detail is being left out in this. Mary Meyer was JFK's lover. This has been well documented. Perhaps his most significant lover in terms of a real connection, not just a one-night stand or something. And she was also the ex-wife of one of the higher ups at the CIA. And we went into all the details of her killing in broad daylight on the Canal Towpath in Georgetown, that's in Washington, D.C., a year after Kennedy is killed. So she was not killed for being Kennedy's mistress and like it was going to come out. And so they decided, oh, well, let's cover that up. No, it had to do with what she knew about his assassination and who she was talking to about it.
Yeah. And I would also say this, if you're new to the podcast, I would go back to, I think it was January of 20, so almost a year ago.
Episode 26.
Episode 26 of when we covered the JFK assassination and the specifics of it. And another great book that I'm still in the process of reading is JFK and the Unspeakable, which is the book you referenced for that episode. And that's also the episode that got me demonetized. So let's...
Which I dispute. I think it was 362 weeks of Epstein coverage that got you demonetized.
Well, I think Lee Camp is such a socialist. He just couldn't stand me making money. So he deliberately subverted the show.
I was like, well, this will stop Graham in his tracks. Listen, I've been suppressed to be allowed, 1,000 views on any given video I put up for the past 5 years. So why not bring Graham down with me?
I think it's a fair assessment. The 362 days of me covering Epstein might have had something to do with it. Anyway, I mean, let's not split hairs. But anyway, back to what you were talking about.
So this week's the book is Mary's Mosaic, and I'll if I think people need to know something we went over last week, I'll mention it as we go forward because there was a lot of stuff brought forward last week. But anyway, last week we mainly spent on how ridiculous the patsy was that they tried to pin her murder on a fellow named Ray Crump, who had no characteristics whatsoever in common with the eyewitness report of who murdered her, except that he was black. That was basically it.
Yeah, and we also talked about it was a close range shooting. His jacket had no physical evidence. There was no blood. There was no physical evidence at all.
On all of his clothes, on anything. Yeah.
Nothing. He had no ties. He didn't know her. There was no ties. There was no physical evidence. There was nothing
no
other
weapon.
than
no weapon.
No weapon. Other than we're just going to scoop up whichever black guy we just decide to pick.
Yeah. And the idea that even if in this incredibly rare circumstance that someone does attempt a rape and it's like failing, basically the person's fighting them off. And so they decided, well, fuck it, I'll just kill them. Even in those phenomenally rare circumstances, this all would have had to take place within about a minute. It would have to be a guy running up to a random woman in the middle of the day being like, I'm going to rape her. Oh, never mind, just kill her, and running off. Like, again,
no scratch marks, no skin under her fingernails, none of those. Again, physical evidence that would happen if that would have actually been the case. There would be physical evidence to prove it, and none.
So now we're moving on to what Mary knew and the people around her and things like that. So Mary Meyer was understandably destroyed by Kennedy's murder, which happened a year before her murder. She was his lover, but like I mentioned, a lot more than that. She refused to believe the lies that were put forward about who had killed Kennedy, mainly Lee Harvey Oswald. Again, we cover that in episode 26. That spoiler alert: who killed Kennedy? It was Chia, or is that pronounced CIA? Either one, Chia or CIA killed Kennedy. And Mary Meyer knew it wasn't Oswald, or at least knew it wasn't only Oswald. She was furious at the Warren report, which came out like a month or not long before she was killed, which seems to me like probably the people that were thinking, okay, we got to get rid of this woman. We're like, well, maybe the Warren report will come out and that'll shut her up. Like she'll go, oh, well, guess I'm wrong.
This seems fair. This seems like legit.
Didn't work. Yeah. The Warren report, headed by Allen Dulles, who JFK fired as head of the CIA.
And also had future President Gerald Ford.
Yep.
Was in the Warren Commission, and a couple other soulless psychos were on it as well, whose names keep popping up throughout Americans' history. So that's who's running this country.
Yep. So Mary Meyer also knew several people who were close to JFK, like Bobby Kennedy, and she couldn't understand. I mean, she wasn't like friends with him, but she knew him, and she couldn't understand why they weren't more outspoken about this plot to kill him. She was told by a go-between that Bobby Kennedy had a long-term plan to, rather than raise a big fuss right then, was going to wait and run for president and then deal with the people that assassinated his brother. But it didn't work out so well.
Yeah, it turns out he shouldn't have shared that plan to anybody, because they went, all right, you're never setting foot in the White House, kiddo.
Well, and even if he hadn't shared that plan, I think as he was running, they might have guessed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's killed as he's running for president in 1968. Mary Meyer wasn't only JFK's lover. She was also very influential in pushing him toward peace. So JFK has this big kind of 180. He starts out, he actually ran, it was either for Congress or I think for president, as basically more of a war hawk, basically saying that,
for Senate. When he ran for Senate, he had some very sort of Cold War, anti-Soviet. They're dangerous. I mean, you got to remember, he fought in World War II, and very much had there's some speeches and stuff like that that they reference in that book, JFK and the Unthinkable or Unspeakable. That there's some very hawkish quotes from him from some speeches.
Yeah. So he has this kind of 180, and it seems that Mary Meyer was very influential in that. And weirdly, so to go into some of her background, this was not the first time she was a player in a large-scale effort for world peace. 15 years earlier, when she was married to Cord Meyer, who, as we mentioned last time, ended up becoming a higher up at the CIA, he and she, this is before he's at the CIA, had worked together to promote a world government structure that would maintain world peace after the devastation of World War II. So Cord Meyer did not start out as this warhawk CIA fucking maniac. He started out as this guy who he also had been in World War II, been hit by a grenade and left for dead, like fucking blew up on top of him, mangled, and must have had crazy PTSD. But he was fighting to create long-term peace for a while, and married to Mary Meyer, and that kind of fails. It falls apart. The CIA courts him, and he's basically corrupted by the CIA. And interestingly, in his journal before his CIA days, he actually writes of how he could be corrupted. He writes, quote, "My peculiar temptation is not money, but notoriety and fame. This must be put aside. If it come in the end, well and good. But if it cannot be sought directly, for it corrupts all that we do and takes the mind from the object." So Cord basically, before it ends up happening, admits that he could be corrupted by notoriety, and being a top of a CIA, is pretty good notoriety as compared to being a basically poor and fruitless world peace warrior.
Yeah, there's not a lot. There's not a lot of glitzy fame, activists just like living that high life, like I'm for peace. Like you don't.
Yeah, you're not even allowed on television.
No, you're not allowed on television. And if you are held up there and you get a lot of acclaim, then it can do this thing that he's talking about of corrupt you. I think anybody can start out with good intentions. Activists, YouTubers, whatever, and then you start getting fame and money, and everyone's telling you you're great, and that's I've seen it in Hollywood. Everyone's told they're great, and then no one's going, "Hey, what are you doing? That's wrong. You're being a dick." It's just like because there's money and profit and leverage you get from being associated with somebody that's in that position and everyone's kissing your ass. And I can imagine it's probably times 100 if you're like in the CIA, the amount of versus just some like sitcom actor or whatever.
Yeah, and you see a lot of these celebrities that, especially if they're kind of newer celebrities, it's just hit big time like a few years prior. They start thinking, well, wow, I can use my celebrity to create large scale change. And as long as it's within the kind of allowable talking points of your mainstream media, then it's fine. You know, if you're on CNN talking about how Black Lives Matter is important or something, then they'll allow all that. But as soon as you go outside of those, you know, once you become anti-corporate or anti-capitalist or fully anti-war, you know, once you start really criticizing the American agenda, slowly you get fewer and fewer gigs. And it slowly starts decreasing your fame and your success, and then the celebrity ends up, and it's not like a day. There's not like a day where someone walks in and says you have a choice: either you shut the fuck up and you do the old movies you used to, or you're done and you can keep talking about, you know, ending war. It's like a slow process. And I've seen it with several people in the past few years. You know, they became, especially with Bernie Sanders, they became kind of activists and things. And then they slowly realized that it was hurting their career. And now you hardly hear from them anymore.
Right.
Politically, I mean, you hardly hear from them.
It's absolutely true. I mean, yeah. And when and again, they might not say, they're not going to say flat out that, but your agent's going to call you and say something like, well, you know, they want to work with you, but they just feel like there's just a lot of negative publicity happening. And so, you know, like, but there's this offer out there, you know, like it gets dangled, you know.
Janine Garofalo had a funny story about it, which is the only time I've heard it really like explain this clearly. Was that so? She when she was at her peak, she was starring in big budget films and in the 90s, and she was also in the early 2000s she was probably the outspoken celebrity about the Iraq War, against the Iraq War, and she was hanging out with kind of more activist people, and so she's brought into a meeting by her management company, and she said they have like a PowerPoint presentation as to why she wasn't getting as many big film roles and things. And they have like a photo of like a zoom in on her tattoos. And one of them says, I don't know, anti-war, or says leftist or something. And they like circle it on the PowerPoint and they go, well, we think this might be part of the problem. And then they show a photo of her, going to a movie premiere with Henry Rollins as her date. And they like, you know, show that photo and they're like, and we think, you know, hanging out with people like this is not help. Basically telling her, you know, change your life, stop being an activist, and then you can get back into doing those big time roles. And she walked out of the meeting.
Of course.
Was like, fuck this. But I think most actresses and actors are probably like, well, guess they have a point. I don't want to lose my career.
You don't want to lose. I mean, I lost work. I mean, I had been doing political vigilante about 6 months. I started in January 2017, so I'm coming up on 5 years here. And I was, because I had hosted some game shows, this producer that I knew offered me, saw me at the Hollywood Improv, and was just like, dude, I got this. It's like a pilot we're going to do, and we're going to do it at Comic-Con, and it's a movie trivia game show. So I've hosted game shows. I had a movie trivia podcast at the time, not movie trivia, but movie podcast, Comedy Film Nerds. I'm a published author, the Comedy Film Nerd Guide to Movies. I'm very knowledgeable about movies, and this was the perfect fit. I didn't have to audition for it. They were like, you, and I was helping them even build out what the show was going to be, you know, round 1, round 2. And they saw my Twitter feed when I was calling out California State Assembly member, Democrat Anthony Rendon, for the state of California had single payer healthcare as a bill. So the citizens of California could have had free healthcare for the last 4 years. And he voted it down at the last minute. And I called him out on Twitter. No swearing, no nothing, all just saying, look what the California Democrats are doing. And that was deemed controversial. And he called me up, this producer, and was like, man, I'm so sorry. And I get it. He's you know, he's married, he has a kid. He's not going to push back against this big, and it was one of these giant media conglomerates that owns an online thing that's big and this and that. And this potentially, it was a decent amount of money for the pilot, but it could have been like, I could have been this big online movie guy, which was, I already had a movie podcast with a successful following. And they just said, and I had to make a decision. It wasn't as obvious as Jillian Garofalo's, but I had to make a decision. I remember sitting there going, wow, do I just stop this political stuff right now, early in its tracks, 6 months in? Political Vigilante wasn't really making me any money, but a little bit, but not much. And do I go back to pursuing traditional show business? And I made the decision of like, no, I want to speak up for what's right. I want to make the world a better place, and I'm going to lose work as a result.
Yeah. And
even now, I've just some of my stances that we don't need to get into are pissing people off in the indie left media or whatever. And I don't care. It's my view. I've lost some. I don't care. Like, this is what I believe in. And when you do what you truly believe in, rather than chase money or clicks or Netflix specials, like you and I have said this before, you and I are never going to get a Netflix comedy special, never, because our comedy is like, the system.
We're not going to get a phone call back.
They're not even going to take our email. I mean, they're not even going to answer the phone. Like, it's not even.
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't even validate our parking if we went to Netflix.
They actually came to where I work and validated my parking.
They took away your parking pass from RT. Just went, sorry, fuck you. Like.
I mean, we could go on about this for, we could do a whole show on this itself, but But anyway, so Cord Meyer has this switch, and Mary Meyer was not quiet about that either. She was not quiet about her dislike of the CIA, even when she was a CIA wife, which was like a small club. You know, the CIA wives really stuck together and all that shit, and she was kind of like the odd person out. And so Cord Meyer ultimately becomes director of Operation Mockingbird, which Graham's a big fan of.
Wow.
And it's, we've done episodes on that before, in which the CIA infiltrated just about all American media and could direct American news media however which way it wanted. At its peak in the 1950s, it was estimated 3,000 salaried and contract CIA employees were engaged in the propaganda efforts. And of course, nowadays, they don't need a operation. It's just the norm.
Oh, they just farm it out to all these private intelligence companies that are out there trolling all of us online, with all these bot accounts. Wow. So she or her husband was part of Operation Mockingbird.
Her husband.
Cord McCall. Okay.
Yeah. Cord Meyer. So here's a quick fun fact about his earlier days when he was working towards world peace. So long before he was in the CIA and before JFK was in Congress, Glamour magazine highlighted 2 post-war public figures in their Young Men Who Care feature. Those 2 men were Cord Meyer and JFK.
Wow. Cord Meyer.
So,
what a tangled web you weave, Cord.
Yes. Seriously. So there is suspicious behavior leading up to Mary's killing. There'd been a lot of things going on. She told friends about. There were several incidents where she felt someone was watching her, that someone was breaking into her townhouse in Georgetown. This is after her divorce from Cord Meyer, breaking into her townhouse when she wasn't home and moving things, but she didn't know what they were after. We'll find out in a moment what they were after. But another point that should be made, and the book goes into deep detail about this, but I'm going to just skim over it. After she became JFK's lover, and by the way, they'd known each other since college, Mary decided that marijuana and even some LSD use had been a powerful door to her perception of the world. Perhaps it could have a similar effect on Kennedy. So this was a time when many people thought LSD could change the world. And certainly it has changed many people in many in positive regard, kind of realizing our place in the world, others in a negative regard, I assume. So Mary started by smoking weed with JFK, which, of course, also back then, like in terms of federal laws, weed was about equivalent to fucking crack or whatever. Like they act, and Joe Biden still acts this way, that you smoke weed and you're a fucking hardcore drug user.
Well, I mean, Joe Biden has his fingers on the pulse of America. I mean,
yeah,
he
yeah.
really knows what's going on. I mean, he's cognizant, he's sharp, he's really got things.
Meanwhile, God knows how many prescription pills he's snorting each morning. But so
They just have a patch that they just tape to his back or his ass that just goes right into his weird body.
So there's a lot in the book about Timothy Leary, and Timothy Leary had several experiences with Mary Meyer, who for a while he didn't realize was Mary Meyer. When she met with him, she went by her maiden name, Mary Pinchot, and he kind of only figured it out later, although she had mentioned that she wanted to turn some powerful men in Washington on to LSD. And Leary, which we could do our own episode on separately, was a Harvard professor who did a great deal of testing with LSD and had, believed it could open the mind and create love and peace. And so Mary Meyer was going to him for help on this. And after JFK was killed, Mary called him and sobbed on the phone that he was killed because, quote, they couldn't control him anymore. He was changing too fast.
Oh, man.
So to get into the aftermath of Mary Meyer's killing, at the funeral of Mary Meyer, two of her pallbearers were two top-level CIA men. Wister Janney, the author's father of Mary's Mosaic, of the book, and Jim Angleton, the angel of death at the CIA. A little ironic that two CIA heads are her pallbearers after the CIA likely had her killed, but, I mean, they did have her killed. But even if you don't believe that, still, she hated the CIA and they hated her. So the fact that the two of them are her pallbearers is, like, ridiculous.
It feels like it's more, and this is just my speculation, more of the CIA going, yeah, that's right, motherfucker. Speak up, and I'm gonna carry your casket down and bury it. Like it's
right. Right.
Like,
not only will we kill you, we will be there pissing on your grave.
Yeah, I will piss on your grave. We're gonna bury it and we're gonna throw extra dirt on it. So just want you to think twice before you start trying to get a president doing LSD.
Yeah. And so Jim Angleton, we mentioned him at the last episode. He's considered kind of the head of a lot of these assassinations. He was, in many ways, he was a secondary head of the CIA. His technical title was chief of the CIA's counterintelligence division in the Directorate of Plans. Basically, this head of the CIA's most secretive department. And Mary's affair with JFK wasn't revealed to the public until 1976 in an Enquirer expose that was very well documented. The information came from one of Mary's good friends, James Truitt, who had been vice president of the Washington Post. It was revealed that Mary kept a detailed diary of her affair with JFK. So then in order to sort out who was involved in killing Mary Meyer, one of the key details is who found out about her death, her killing, and when they found out, and when they say they found out. Because if you follow those threads, and these are public statements by these people, if you follow those threads, it's very clear that they're covering something up and that they were somehow either involved in it or at least had advanced knowledge of it. So that's why it's so important to go through. I'm about to go through the play-by-play of who knew what in terms of when Mary Meyer died. So Mary Meyer is killed on that canal path. They don't grab the supposed suspect, Ray Crump, until she's killed at like 12:30. They don't grab a suspect until between 1 and 1:15. So and he's not brought to the police station until 2 p.m. that day. And the first person but her body is not identifiable at that time. They have no idea who it was. She has no idea. She has no ID on her. They just know this is clearly a fairly wealthy person living in Georgetown. That's, white woman. That's all they know. And so it turns out being a key to unraveling this as to when these people found out that she had died. In the original account, the first to figure out that it was Mary Meyer was Jim Angleton's wife, Cicely, who was Mary Meyer's friend. Because remember, Mary Meyer was ex-wife of another head of the CIA. So she says she heard a radio bulletin in the afternoon on the day Mary was killed, saying a woman had been murdered on the Georgetown towpath. She somehow takes this radio bulletin, which no one knows how descriptive it was, but how descriptive could it have been without an ID? And she just assumes it was probably Mary. So she panics and calls her husband, Jim Angleton, fucking angel of death at the CIA, who told her she must have been mistaken. There's no way it was Mary. They had scheduled Mary to go to a poetry reading that night. They were going to pick her up. And so he says, forget about it. However, 30 years later, Cicely does an interview where she never mentions the radio bulletin and never mentions calling her husband. Even though she talks about when she found out Mary died, she has now erased all of that part, which seems rather significant.
Kinda. It seems like Jim Edgerton was like, it seems very CIA oppy to me. Like all these planted, and we had a witness there, and there was a person, and she called, and like she doesn't remember. Maybe it never happened, or what?
Yeah, and it gets even more hilarious because in 1976, so years after, Jim and Cicely Angleton said they arrived at Mary's house that night, the night she's murdered. She's not identified. Her body's not identified until 6 p.m. They say they arrive at her house that night to take her to a poetry reading that they had agreed to go to. This means that although Cicely frantically called her husband at the CIA to say, I heard this radio bulletin, I'm pretty sure Mary Meyer was murdered, they still went to fucking pick her up for a fucking poetry reading. What the fuck? Like, it doesn't add up at all. I'm pretty sure our friend's dead. Nah, let's just assume we're going to the poetry reading tonight.
Should we call her? Nah, let's just pick her up at the...
Let's just pick her up.
Oh, man. And what was this poetry reading? Just like 10 ways to assassinate somebody?
Yeah.
What's a CIA poetry reading? Like, what poetry do they have?
I know. I can't imagine. So then, but it still gets even better. The version coming from the Angletons. So they say they arrive at her home to pick her up for this poetry reading around 6 p.m. or so. And she's not there, but her car's there. So they call her answering service, which back then there weren't answering machines really. So an answering service was like a person that would take messages for you.
Right.
And Jim Angleton in 1976 himself says the answering service was the first time he hears of Mary's death. Meaning Mary Meyer's answering fucking service tells Jim Angleton, oh, you're calling for Mary? She's been murdered. So not only does the answering service somehow have the news that Mary Meyer's been murdered, despite the fact her body is just now being identified, somehow it gets to her answering service like immediately. And secondly, they're giving out that information to people that call.
Yeah. That's what the answering service is. She was murdered, and the guy that got there's no physical evidence on him. But yeah, would you like to leave a message? This is Mary Meyer's answer.
It'll take her a while to get back to you. Like, don't expect a quick response.
Oh my God. It's like, you see why the CIA has upped its game to just like character assassination and just making sure there's no activists or whistleblowers anywhere near power now. It's just all people that play ball, because these cover-ups are so preposterous when you dig into the details of them.
Right. They do a lot more of that, and they'll destroy people's lives outside of murdering them.
Right.
Because I think they finally realized that the problem with murdering someone is that people will look into it forever. Like, people will never stop looking into someone getting hit with a gunshot. Whereas
You're
If
right.
someone's life is just destroyed, they lose all their money, they lose their credibility, then they're running around saying, oh, it's the CIA doing it. And everyone looks at them like, haha, right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because they now control the media more than they ever have, it's far easier to just go, well, this guy's a crackpot, like, oh, he's nuts. And like, again, most Americans, how many Americans even know who Bill Binney is? They don't even know. They've never even heard, they don't know who he is. Or even everybody's probably heard of Julian Assange, but if you were to ask them, they would probably regurgitate some State Department talking points like, oh, isn't he that guy that worked with the Putin, or, you know what I mean? Like they would say something.
Yeah.
Wasn't he charged with rape or something?
Or they'd say, they say that guy that tried to help Trump get elected, like
something.
No
and
idea.
So, the CIA won rather than like, if and again, it's like with Epstein, when he hung himself with a paper t-shirt, people were they're still asking questions. That's why Ghislaine Maxwell is going to be given either a slap on the wrist or they're going to acquit her. And then they can say, well, she had a trial. I mean, our court system's not perfect, but she had a fair trial. The witnesses got to speak, and then all that evidence has gone away. It can't ever be used again. And so this is a far better situation than, because when what's his name, Leslie Graham, was in Congress saying Epstein didn't kill himself. Lindsey Graham. They were like, this is bad. We don't want this being spoken about like this. So they're just going to go, hey, we gave her a trial. I guarantee you her acquittal, if it happens, or whatever slap on the wrist, they're going to announce it like Friday. It's be like, Ghislaine Maxwell was acquitted. 10, 9, 8, 7, should. Oh, like that's when it'll come out.
And the following day, there's an orphanage fire that kills 1,000 puppies or something, and that's all they talk about.
Yes. Firefighter rescues kittens or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Football player saves the town from a flood.
Yeah. But I was about to also bring up Epstein because he is one of the rare circumstances where they didn't have the time to waste in terms of like slowly maligning him and imprisoning him and shutting him up. Like they needed to shut him up immediately. And I'm not saying it was CIA, but whoever did it didn't have time for like the long version, the long game.
Right. Yep.
So that was the Angleton's version. Then there's Ben Bradley's account. Ben Bradley is very important in this story. He is now, you might notice all these people have multiple connections to this world, and it's because the oligarchy is a fairly small club. I mean, Mary Meyer was also the niece of a Pennsylvania governor. So,
and they're all sleeping with each other. They're just a sordid group of blue blood insiders.
It's a small club of these blue blooders. And so it's like, they're not just one thing. So Ben Bradley, who ultimately becomes editor of the Washington Post, was also Mary Meyer's brother-in-law. He was married to Tony Bradley, initially Tony Pinchot, I guess. And so, yeah, he's her brother-in-law, but he's also a journalist who becomes the editor of the Washington Post. So Bradley said in his memoir that he heard about Mary's death, quote, just after lunch. Keep in mind, Mary Meyer murdered at 12:30, body not identified till 6 p.m. He heard about Mary's death just after lunch on the day she was killed, after he got a phone call from, quote, a friend asking if he heard the radio report. Okay. Besides the fact that, again, a radio report about a woman killed on a towpath is not going to go into such detail that they're like, that must have been Mary. And second side note, who are all these incredibly busy, like CIA people, journalists, and they all listening to the radio at 2 p.m. on a weekday? Like, they just leave the fucking radio on all day.
And that crime of all crimes just stands out to them and go, got to be Mary Meyer. I'm going to call Ben Bradley. Yeah.
It's got to be Mary Meyer. I'm going to call him. So again, at the time, the police didn't know Mary's identity. She had no ID on her. This is also a change from Bradley's initial story that he gives a testimony of in, okay, yeah. So the 1995, that version about I got a phone call from a friend doesn't come out from Bradley until 1995 when he writes his memoir. But initially in his testimony in court when they were trying to have the trial of Ray Crump, the patsy who ultimately gets acquitted, he never mentions that. He never mentions, I got a phone call from a friend, any of that shit. He says in his testimony that he was alerted to her death when the police came to his house at 6 p.m. that night to ask him to go identify the body. So that's his original testimony. But in this new 1995 version, he gets this phone call at 2 p.m. from a friend. He then rushes home, leaving work early, to prep his family that their friend and his sister-in-law and his wife's sister had likely been murdered. Bradley ended up also being the one to identify the body. But these are two ridiculously different stories as to when he found out.
Wow. Who published this book? Court Meyer at the Langley Printing Press.
Yeah. CIA Printing Press, yeah. So let's see.
While you're sifting through that, everybody, please hit the like button and support what we do at liberapay.com/government secrets so we can keep this fine content that will disavow you of whatever remaining inkling you have that America's a good country. So thank you for supporting everything that we do. America's a complete lie. It's a horror show. It's a nightmare. And it's always been evil from day one. So thank you for watching our show. Anyway, Lee Camp, please continue.
And happy New Year.
And Happy New Year, whatever holidays you're celebrating. 2022 is going to be so amazing. 21 was great. It's been a great couple of years.
21 was pretty perfect. So, I mean, it's tough to top this.
2022 will be the year that we just have full-on fascism. It won't just be one day like January 6th. It's going to the financial markets will collapse. But hopefully Bitcoin will go to 1 million. Anyway.
So more than 30 years after Mary's death, Ben Bradley finally reveals who that friend was who called him on the afternoon to tell him that Mary had been killed long before anyone had identified the body, or long before the police had identified the body. Bradley says it was his friend, Wister Janney, the author's father. So, longtime CIA officer and career CIA officer and father of the author. The author's Peter Janney, Wister Janney. And, how impressive that a CIA officer happened to be listening to the radio around 2 p.m. on a workday and happened to think that the description of an unknown woman would have been Mary Meyer and that he should call Bradley and inform him.
Hey, Ben, I know you're writing this memoir. If you want it to see the light of day and yourself to keep living, you're going to want to change a few things in there, like that whole testimony thing at the court. We're going to just breeze by that, and you're going to get a phone call that happened at 2 o'clock and prepare your family for it. And you're going to stick to that story, and the book's going to do quite well.
So this gets kind of even more creepy, especially for the author. So the author was in college at the time. We mentioned in the last episode that he'd been family friends with the Meyers growing up, and that his best friend was one of her sons that tragically got killed by a car accident when he was 9 years old. And so the author's away at college when this happens. So he doesn't see the play-by-play of his father coming home that day, etc. But he basically interviews his mother and his brother as to what they remember from that time. And Wister Janney was already dead. He died in like 1980. But both the author's mother and brother said that Wister acted as if he didn't know about Mary's death until he got a phone call that evening at 8 p.m., supposedly from the police. So both of these people say they're sitting there with their husband/father, and there is no mention of, hey, our family friend has been killed in a horrible murder, until he gets a phone call at 8 p.m., supposedly from the police. This would mean that he intentionally pretended not to know about Mary's death when he got home that day.
For 6 hours.
For 6 hours, but at least, let's assume he got home at 6 p.m., at least 2 hours in front of his wife and kid.
I mean,
yeah.
Well, I mean, part of me believes that like blue blood Anglo don't show emotion, don't say anything uncomfortable could kind of support that theory just for a second.
But then why wait for a phone call?
Well, why wait for a phone call? And wow, what a wacky, convenient coincidence that this guy that is now the one that supposedly called Ben Bradley, oh, weird, he's dead. So we cannot double check this.
Well, the weird, I mean, not weird thing about that, but I think the truth behind that is these people didn't feel comfortable or weren't willing to reveal that the phone call from the quote unquote friend was him until after his death. Because after his death, they figured, well, this won't come back to haunt him or anything. So they only revealed that it was him that called them at 2 p.m. after he died.
So just everyone involved has got conflicting stories. Like
wildly
conflicting stories. And they all know each other. And it's all rigged. And it's just like, even Ben Bradley, who, I don't know. I mean, you like to think that he has, all this journalistic integrity or whatever, but he's still in that world. I mean, that was part of the, like, he's
the Washington Post. What integrity do they have?
I mean, back then you wanted to believe they had integrity when they uncovered, Watergate, and they uncovered the Pentagon Papers. But still,
yeah, but they were still doing, they were kind of forced into the Pentagon Papers. They really didn't have a choice at some point. And they were in league with Operation Mockingbird. Actually, I'll get to, there'll be another point where I talk about Washington Post working with Operation Mockingbird.
So they've been suspect even before they got bought out by Jeff Bezos.
Oh yeah.
It's so great. There's like nothing you can hang your hat on in America. There's not even a like, well, I mean, yes. There's always a like, well, they did they did Watergate, good for them. Pentagon Papers, like you say, they were sort of forced into, but even then they were helping Operation Mockingbird.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to nail down what it was that went on in the media back then, there was a significant chunk of journalists that legit were in their positions because they wanted to reveal the truth. And they weren't really accustomed to being told what to report on. Although there was a seemingly agreed upon code of not revealing like president's affairs and things.
Well, because they were all having them. They were all sleeping around. They all had mistresses. I mean, they were all just having key parties or whatever else they were doing out there. And just as debaucherous, yet they walk around. The people like if you want to have those swinger parties, that's fine. But then they always act like they're holier than thou. That's the problem I always have with that group, is they always act like, and I worked at a country club one summer as a caddy, and they always act like they're better and they're more morally just and they have this integrity, and they're just behind closed doors. They're just weasels. I mean, they're just.
It's like Bill Cosby telling black men to pull their pants up.
Yeah.
Like literally, he felt the need to go on fucking Oprah or whatever and be like, if black men would just pull their pants up, then they could achieve some real things in life.
Yeah. Rather than give them roofies like I did.
Yeah. Rather than rape slews of women.
God.
So, Cord Meyer, in his book decades later, said he found out about his ex-wife's murder when he got a phone call in the afternoon from a friend, which likely, or maybe he also revealed it was also Worcester Janney. So
that guy was just head of the phone tree, Worcester Janney.
Yeah, he was head of the CIA phone tree on assassinations. Yeah. He was like, oh shit, it's my turn on the phone. God damn it. But I just did Lumumba.
And you have to bake cookies this week for the CIA cookie fund.
The cookie guy and the phone tree guy in the same week. Hell hath no fury like. So So all these incongruities add up to make it clear that several, if not all of these people were at least aware of the plan to kill Mary Meyer. It seems likely that Cord Meyer, Ben Bradley, and Wister Janney were all aware of it or aware that something was about to go down. And it seems almost without a doubt that Jim Angleton was the mastermind. Bradley, in an interview in 1976, I find this from someone who studied psychology, I find this hilarious. Bradley, in an interview in 1976, said that Mary was grabbed from behind, shot once, and died instantly. That's his description of the murder. Now, there's no way in hell he doesn't know that that's not true. She gave an epic fight. She was dragged 25 feet back across towards the canal before a second shot killed her. So it was not surprise killed instantly. But psychologically, it makes sense that Ben Bradley, her brother-in-law, is more comfortable with the thought that she died instantly, that she didn't have some horrible end. So he's changed the story, either in his own mind or at least in interviews, to make it easier for whatever guilt he had over this shit. So I have one more section I want to do before we save the rest for next time. If you can handle it, Graham, I don't want to break you. I don't know how many smoothies you have ready at the ready, but
I don't. I'm out of smoothies, and I literally need to go get more vegan protein powder. So we're already on very, very thin ice, Lee Camp. Based on what happened in my childhood and then this show, I have no faith in humanity. Like zero faith, none.
Perhaps this show is having a polar opposite effect on the two of us. I somehow feel better if I both get it off my chest and, do comedy about it. So that's why I enjoy this show. You, on the other hand, I think I'm just slowly crushing you, which is not, it's not my goal. It's not.
No, it's not slowly crushing me. I do enjoy laughing about it. It's actually, this show is helping. I mean, yes, I've never had much faith in humanity. My parents took me to, as I said, visited Dachau when I was 5. So this show, it just helps me.
Now, were they like, this is what happens to bad little boys?
I mean, I was raised Catholic. I wouldn't put it past them. This is like, better say your Hail Marys or, no, that's what happens when you have a college professor dad that just thinks everything needs to be an educational lesson. When you're 5 living in Germany, it's like, hey, Dad, don't they have any go-kart tracks in Germany? Like something fun, a water park, something. This show actually helps me laugh about how awful everything is and helps me kind of, I guess, happy that eventually, a meteor, something's going to hit the planet and there'll be no record of the human race from this planet. So that,
if you're looking for that, then watch Don't Look Up that just came out.
Yeah, I heard about it. I heard about that. I'm excited to watch that. That's going to be fun. But anyway, I'm sorry. We're wrapping up here. You were saying.
All right, this is the last segment I'll do. I know it's a long episode, but so another key area where their stories don't align from these people has to do with the search for Mary's diary, which is also likely what the people were looking for when she said she had home break-ins and didn't understand what people were doing or why they were in her house. Her diary reportedly had info about her affair with JFK, but likely, and according to her friends, or a couple of friends, had much more info on her suspicions about the CIA, that they had killed Jack Kennedy, what he had told her about going up against the CIA in confidence. And so Mary's friends and family have at least 3 separate versions as to who went searching for the diary and where it went. In one version reported in 1976, 5 days after this was reported in 1976, but 5 days after Mary's murder, the Angletons, Tony Bradley, her sister, Cord Meyer, and Ann Chamberlain, who's another friend that I haven't mentioned yet, they went searching for the diary together in Mary's house. They made it like a group thing. Like, we're the friends of Mary and we're going to go looking for this diary. Anne Chamberlain, by the way, was a good friend of Mary's who fled to Maine soon after Mary's death out of fear and has almost never spoken about Mary's death except for one interview with author Leo D'Amour, who was preparing a book about Mary in the 1990s, like for years, extensively researching a book about Mary's killing in the 1990s. We'll get into more about Leo D'Amour later. But so this woman fled to Maine and has essentially, with the exception of one interview, never spoken, refused to ever speak about it again, which makes you think she might know something.
Wow.
Ben Bradley gave a different version of the search for Mary's diary, in which he searched with his wife and Jim Angleton the day after Mary's death, just the three of them. But Ben Bradley gave a different version in his sworn testimony during the day of the trial of Ray Crump, in which he says he searched the studio that night of her death, meaning he goes to identify the body at 6 p.m., goes like running to her studio, maybe with his wife, I'm not sure who was with him, but to search for this diary, which is, it makes sense he changed his story from that, because that sounds fucking insane. Oh, my sister-in-law's dead. My wife's sister's dead. She's been killed. Let's go get her diary immediately. I mean, it's fucking crazy. Angletons and others said they wanted to get a hold of the diary in order to protect the reputation of JFK, because they knew the diary revealed his affair with Mary Meyer and perhaps some drug use as well. Now, in reality, that's fucking hilarious, because Angleton was involved in the murder of JFK. And also, all of the CIA, essentially all of them, fucking hated JFK because JFK was trying to crush the CIA. He had said he wanted to break it up into 1,000 pieces and blow it into the wind. He had fired the head of the CIA. He had said he wanted to decrease the CIA funding by 20% in the coming years. JFK, in his final years, had done a lot to try and crush or slow down the CIA. So the idea that Mr. CIA head Jim Angleton was like, I just wanted to protect our dear old JFK, is like amazing.
My good pal that I had assassinated, that I had a magic bullet, defy the laws of physics. I really just wanted to get this.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't want anyone, people thinking he was sleeping around, you know? I didn't want to thinking he was two-timing old Jackie.
That's the worst thing that could come out of that diary. Not that the CIA had JFK killed, but that, he was sleeping around. That's the worst. That's the worst. Oh.
But I think the most hilarious version of events came from another interview with Ben Bradley. And I think this speaks to the fact that Ben Bradley, who obviously worked with the CIA to some extent, but I think he was more of an informant than a, CIA operative. And he fucking sucks at lying. He changes his story like several times in like hilarious ways. So Ben Bradley said, and this is a quote, "Everyone thought her diary was full of all kinds of gossip, which it wasn't. I think I burned it because there was interest in the diary and I didn't want the kids to get into it." What the fuck? So the diary had nothing of significance in it and I burned it.
These people give the most ridiculous versions of anything I've ever heard of. But they probably, it's that thing. If you say it convincing, then it's okay. You know what I'm saying? If you just like lean in and say it, like Brian Williams would always lean in, war is pretty good. Like, oh, I believe him now. I think war is a good thing. Like, and this, it's every time I think the CIA can't outdo itself with its crazy bullshit, we come across another story with more flagrant lies. So Ben Bradley just felt a newsman. That's his whole, is the journalism truth. That's that documentary that came out like a year or two ago on HBO was like the Ben Brad, he was just I'm a newspaper man through and through. I got ink pouring through my veins, gets this diary. And I'm going to set it on fire to protect the kids.
And it has nothing in it.
And there's nothing in it.
I looked at it. It was just drawings and nothing in it, but I had to burn it because, the kids, kids.
She just wrote out Mary Meyer Kennedy or whatever. She was just doing that thing that high school girls do.
Yeah. Just wrote Mary Kennedy over and over again.
Mary Kennedy over and over. Mrs. Mary Kennedy, Jack and Mary Kennedy. Like, that's what it is. And then just like unicorn drawings and sunsets. And then some classified CIA stuff about assassinating a president. But anyway, that was all just, we all had to set that all on fire.
But so, like I said, likely what the diary actually had in it was, besides details of her affair with JFK, she had put together that the CIA had JFK killed. As we've mentioned in previous episodes, JFK turned against the CIA, but maybe more importantly, or equally importantly to just him turning against the CIA, was that he had this 180. He had been aligning with the USSR. We now have proof, absolute proof, of his back channel conversations with Khrushchev, working towards peace. So he and Khrushchev are basically aligning the USSR and America in a peaceful, détente and working together. In the weeks, it was actually in the same month that JFK was assassinated, he had written a memo about bringing Russia into the International Space Station. He had also given a speech a couple of months before at American University about peace with the USSR, about what an impressive and important country it was. He mentioned the fact that World War II would have been lost without them, that they lost 27 million people and we lost, 500,000. These are all things that a president can't really say. And he fired Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, in order to try and get control of it so that he could decrease its power. But basically, the CIA was still aligned with Allen Dulles. They still would, call him for advice. Essentially, Allen Dulles was still the head of the CIA even after he was fired. So JFK couldn't stop the power of the CIA. And this seems to be what Mary Meyer had put together. And she wasn't quiet about it either. She'd been speaking to many people about what she believed actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, that American University speech was sort of I feel like the final nail in the coffin for the CIA. I mean, JFK had been doing all this back channel stuff with Khrushchev, which I'm sure they were aware of. And then that American University speech is really, it's a very profound speech. Not only does it like recognize Russia's role in World War II, but he really talks in that very eloquent JFK way of what world peace would look like in future generations. And this is, again, a guy that was a combat vet from World War II and knows what awful war looks like. Yep. And really extending the olive branch to the Soviets and talking about, we're a global, we're a global race. I'm paraphrasing, but rather than like Russian, American, like he's like, we're all citizens together. And it was this really beautiful speech, and that's going to hurt their bottom line. So they killed him for it. These fucking sons of bitches. They're the worst people in the world. Like, they're the worst, soulless bags of shit I've ever seen. They are so awful. They are vermin. And, as a vegetarian, I do not feel guilty about having a rat that carries disease be exterminated. And nor should we feel this way about these CIA vile, like, feed them rat poison. They're bags of shit.
He was also back channeling with Castro to create peace there, and decreasing Vietnam, starting the end of Vietnam instead of ramping it up. Which
we would have been out of Vietnam by probably 65, like out of it, done.
And immediately after he's killed, Johnson ramps up Vietnam.
Yes, we would have been out of Vietnam by 65. We would have been, we would have had open relations with Cuba. We would have not spent the trillions of dollars. There wouldn't be all these 100,000 warheads that are all over the planet right now. Just let's hope they don't detonate or erode or whatever. Yep. We wouldn't have had any of that. We would have had, who knows, the level of peace we would have had. And these assholes ruined it.
Yeah. So I'll save the rest for next time. A little more a conclusion of where the diary may have ended up, and so much more as to how Mary Meyer was assassinated or killed.
Tune in for episode 68, the final part 3 conclusion of the Mary Meyer saga.
Unless we end up going too long and it goes into part 4, but likely the final episode.
Could be a 2-part final. If I forget the number, it might be episode 67, A, B, and C. Who knows? Tune in next week.
Exactly. But yeah, that's what I got for this week.
Well, folks, support our show. Go to labirpay.com/government secrets. It's on the screen right now. If you're listening to this on like Spotify or iTunes or whatever, hit the like button, give it a 5-star review. All those little analytical things help. We totally understand if money's tight, and share this. You know, we've been doing this show for a year and a half now. And 2021 was our first full year doing it. It's been really fun to do. I know I joke about it, but I do look forward to doing this show every week because it is. I like learning about stuff. I like learning the truth. I hate not knowing the truth.
Yeah, and I like to think that these bastards, even in death, are being revealed. Like, if I can add a little to fucking shit on the legacy of Jim Angleton, then I feel good about that.
If somehow Alan Dulles' rotten, soulless corpse is rotting more as a result of this show, then I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And hopefully his offspring will hear this and go, wow, grandpa was fucking the devil.
Right.
So if we're doing that, yeah. And it's, this is how you and I can resist. 2 comedians talking about this stuff and laughing and mocking these assholes. They think they're so smart and clever, and we just mock them for the jackwagons that they are. And
damn straight. And everybody check out radindiemedia.com, RADINDIE media.com for your daily digital anti-corporate fuck the mainstream media news. That's on the masthead.
That's on the masthead. Okay, good. I was about to say, is that the URL or is that just the masthead? Okay, cool. Yeah, folks, and check out Political Vigilante and support us at rockfin.com/Graham Elwood. It's blockchain cryptocurrency. They don't censor us. I also have a Patreon and all that stuff. So support everything that we're doing. And Lee Camp, we will see you next year, buddy.
Thanks, man. Happy New Year.
All right, buddy. Happy New Year.